To go from a practice to a profession, the field of thought leadership needs a number of things. One of them is rigorous academic research, studies that further the practice and help students prepare for careers in thought leadership. Will Harvey is a professor of leadership at the University of Bristol in England, and he's an international research fellow at Oxford University's Center for Corporate Reputation. Will has been researching, teaching, and consulting on corporate reputation, leadership, and managing people. He caught my attention in 2020 when he and his three co-authors published a research paper on thought leadership. Their research was based in part on interviews with more than a dozen marketing and other heads in 12 professional services firms, ranging from a consultancy with more than 500,000 employees to an architecture firm with 500 employees. The tensions of defining and developing thought leadership within knowledge-intensive firms was the first academic research I had seen on the topic of thought leadership. My hope is that this is just the first of a number of academic studies on thought leadership. I spoke with Will Harvey recently about their research, what drew he and his co-authors to the topic, what they felt were the most important findings, the marketplace conversations that the research has generated with them, what new research he believes the university world should conduct on the topic of thought leadership, and whether universities have done enough to prepare students for careers in thought leadership. For anyone who would love to see universities do more research on thought leadership and see more university graduates come prepared for this profession, I think you will find my conversation with Will Harvey to be illuminating. It's wonderful to see the university world having discovered this undiscovered tropical island of thought leadership. So I really look forward to talking to you about your research and your outlook on the field of thought leadership and where it goes, especially from a university, from an academic standpoint.
Thanks so much for having me, Bob, and it's a pleasure. Looking forward to our discussions.
So, Will, you published your study in 2020, you and your three co-authors. What was it that captured your interest and those of your co-authors in this topic of thought leadership? What motivated you to say, we should research this?
I think there's quite a few different but really interesting things going on in business and society. I think we've got a real problem with misinformation and disinformation, and sometimes, that comes under the umbrella of fake news. We've obviously, alongside that, had a proliferation of influencers, predominantly influencers on social media platforms. We've also had, to some extent, the democratization of information, where more people are able to sort of generate content themselves and obviously to disseminate that to large audiences very quickly. And I think the combination of those factors, in my view, means that there's a lot of confusion generally amongst the public, and sometimes that saturation of information warps people's sense of reality. Whether that's elections, geopolitics, vaccines, the economy. I think you could name all facets of business, society, life, where a lot of that confusion comes in. And that was, I think, the starting point in the context where my co-authors and I felt this is an area that we want to engage with. And this sort of concept of thought leadership, I think, is a tremendous opportunity, either as an individual or as a business, to really tell others in your own way who we are, what we stand for, and why what we do is important to others.
And so what year are we talking about when I know you published a paper in 2020, but how far back did this exploration begin? What year?
Yeah, that would probably be about 2016. And Alexandra, who was one of our co-authors, and great about this project is it's a mixture of academics and people actually practicing thought leadership, as Alexandra was. So this was part of her dissertation that she was doing with Vince, one of our co-authors. And so in a way, I think the celebration of this is that's where a practitioner is almost sort of throwing in the face to the academic, like, hey, this is a subject that we really need to engage with. And it was a great dissertation, and that sort of accelerated a conversation after the dissertation around how do we get this out to a wider audience. So Alexandra should definitely take the credit for that.
Very good. What did you and your co-researchers, your co-authors find to be the biggest challenges in researching this topic? We'll get to the key findings in a little bit, but what were the key obstacles to actually shedding new light on this topic, which you guys certainly did?
I think the dearth of information on thought leadership within the academic realm. I would say, I hope, with modesty, that I think this is the first academic study that has specifically looked at thought leadership. And so the challenge there often is persuading editors and reviewers of a journal that, look, this is genuinely a new field, and not only a new field, but one that warrants careful attention. And I think it's been warranted. I mean, if you look at the article, which your listeners will be able to access for free, it's the Journal of Knowledge Management. It's just received the best paper for that journal for the year, and it's just been nominated for an additional award. So I think, I'm not saying that because, oh, well done to us, but I think it says something, that there's something about this topic that people recognize as important. But that was also the challenge at the beginning, Bob, because we were trying to persuade reviewers and editors, look, this is something that's really relevant to business and society, and something that we as an academic field need to engage with and start a conversation.
Do you or your co-authors have any thoughts about why the topic was ignored by academia for so many years?
I think one of the challenges with academia is disciplinary domains, where often you're talking about similar phenomena, but using different kinds of language. And so a lot of my academic background has looked, for instance, at migration, and you'll be amazed how people from sociology to business to journalism to sociology, they're talking about the same thing but different language. And I think that's what's going on here, that there's certainly been a lot of work done on, let's say, knowledge management, management ideas, business gurus. So these kind of splintered fields, but nothing really under the sort of domain of sort of thought leadership. And so I think that it's a terminology sometimes that's a problem. But in this case, I think the term thought leadership has really been sort of driven by practitioners. And to be honest, when we started this project, somewhat embarrassingly, you feel like you're so far behind the curve because business is way ahead in terms of engaging with this concept and people talking about it. And there's nothing in the academic domain whatsoever. So that again reinforced to us, this is something that we need to get to grips with.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder if we would have seen the same pattern in a field, say, like project management, which has been around for, I think, 60 some odd years. When was it finally discovered by academia as a legitimate field worthy of inquiry, versus how much businesses have been talking about project management for decades? I wonder if we'd see, a similar pattern here. And any thoughts on that? I don't know if you've followed project management as a field or a profession, but
absolutely. I think definitely with project management, I'm already seeing it, to be honest, Bob, in other areas like the digital economy. Suddenly this is becoming, very popular. Data analytics is, a huge field now, not only in terms of research in business schools, but also in terms of its teaching domain. Sustainability, of course, has been around in scientific field for a long time, but you're getting people working in areas like biodiversity economics, sustainable economics. You talk about things like the triple bottom line. So I think there's lots of shifts going on, both within business schools, but more broadly within universities, which is sort of mapping on to huge demand from different stakeholders across business, society, politics, and everywhere. So, yeah, these are just a few, I think, of many trends that we'll see over the next years and decades.
yeah, and these make for, and we'll talk about this later as well. These make for these nascent trends that, say, the business practitioners have picked up on before the academic world has discovered them. they make for good opportunities for the university world, right? To begin researching and preparing students, for these jobs, et cetera, and so on. But we'll talk about that later. I wanted to ask you about what seemed to me to be the most important findings of your book, which were around the three tensions in thought leadership, as you described them. The individual, the organizational, and the industry. And then you had further kind of sub tensions within the three. Let's start with the individual tension of, especially the one that I thought, and I'm looking at it right now. How do individuals balance using thought leadership that they get from working with their clients with the restrictions, as you say, of client confidentiality? How did that tension among individuals play out for you? And did you see that as the biggest one among the individual tensions of thought leadership?
Yeah, that was a really significant one because, of course, clients now of all kinds of firms, particularly but not limited to professional service firms, they're often quite experienced buyers. And so, whereas in the early stages of management consulting, clients are sort of desperate for insight, from management consultants. Now you often find a situation where clients have often worked themselves in professional service firms. So they've been sort of both sides of the equation. And I think what that means is when you have experienced professionals and clients having conversations, particularly at a strategic level, you get a lot of interesting insight in terms of different domains, whether it's leadership, whether it's strategy, operations, cost cutting, all these kind of main domains in business and management. But as you alluded to in one of the tensions that we found is that does create some difficulties, because on the one hand, these great insights are ones that you feel brilliant. We need to use those as subsequent conversations with our clients, either directly or we want to sort of advertise or market that to them through different materials that we use. But at the same time, you've got to be extremely careful, of course, because if you're too revealing in some of those insights, then you breach that confidentiality you have with your client. And so the seduction might be that, yeah, I want to do that because it's going to open up a whole new business domain for us. But one of the key things with professional service firms and that consultant client relationship is the sort of the trust aspect because of information asymmetry, where you often sometimes as a provider have more information than the buyer. And the moment you sort of breach that trust, and that trust gets broken because it gets passed on to other people in terms of that you're not trustworthy, that can be a real problem. And so I think that's the sort of the kinds of tensions, Bob, that we were sort of finding in that context.
And in you spoke with 12 professional services firms, architecture, consulting, law, and others. Did you, of course, without mentioning names of those firms, did any of them seem to deal with that tension better? The tension of balancing client confidentiality at the individual level versus, we really want to say something new and important and have it backed by evidence, the evidence that we use because our client actually implemented what we said and got results.
I wouldn't say it was differentiated by sector. I would say it was probably differentiated by reputation, meaning that often those firms that had the best reputation were often the ones that set a very high ethical code of conduct in terms of the way they work and how they get that balance. And I think, incidentally, that's why some of the leading professional service firms often find themselves receiving a lot of criticism in the media when something does go wrong, because the bar that has been set for them over many years and decades, is very high, both in terms of the quality of the insight they provide, but also in terms of that confidentiality and relationship. And I think that would be true across all those sectors that you mentioned within professional service firms. But as you know, and this is this tension at the individual level to the firm level, it only takes one partner or senior partner to sort of seriously mess things up for people to start to think that there may be sort of some kind of cultural issue going on, where it's not just about one person, but there's a wider kind of thing going on within the firm. Which is why often when there is sort of misconduct, you'll see the firms come out very quickly and sort of sever ties with the individual, because they really want to signal that actually that completely goes against our code of conduct and our standards.
Yeah. Let's talk about the tension that drew my greatest attention at the organizational level, which was because I've seen this play out in many ways, how organizations can decide. Well, there are a couple that stood out under organizational, which is how organizations decide how much thought leadership to, I'll put it, outsource versus insource. Tell us more about that tension and how you think it should be managed.
Yeah, and this is some earlier work that Vince Mitchell, one of our co-authors, and I have done, was just generally around reputation within professional service firms. And what we found is that actually professional service firms, a lot of them don't have a great deal of experience with high quality thought leadership, at least historically. Recently, you've seen a lot of activity. Of course, the exemplar would be McKinsey and Company, and the McKinsey Quarterly outlet would be a great example of how that has been built up over a long period of time and is well respected and read by the kinds of people that they want to read it. So what we generally found was that there was a big scrambling around. How do we create similar high quality content without just looking like we're sort of kind of ripping off what McKinsey have already done, but to a lower level? And I think that sort of gets to the heart of the issue. I think the preference would be, if we can, let's do it in-house. But frankly, a lot of these people, and often it is the partners and senior partners that are driving a lot of these discussions. They don't have training, they don't have insight around, okay, well, how do we actually disseminate that in the most meaningful way? That starts to broach into sort of other sort of disciplinary domains. And that's where the sort of the outsourcing comes in, because you need to get communication experts, you need journalists, you need to get cartoonists, artists, other kinds of people with different multimedia kinds of skills, not necessarily to kind of generate the content, because the content is already in-house, but it's about, well, how do you package that in a way that's really going to be accessible to the kinds of people that they want to consume that kind of content.
That's right. And those, in my experience, those skills are they're less common in professional services firms or other business to business firms that are trying to be seen as thought leaders in their domains. Communication skills, and in your research, I think you mentioned tacit knowledge, just trying to try to codify knowledge that's in the heads of some expert at a law firm, or a bunch of experts at a law firm or consulting firm or architecture firm, or you fill in the blank firm. These individuals may have done something for years, but they have never really written it down, and the skills in writing, taking tacit knowledge and making it explicit so that the average executive, the average person can understand. Those skills, in my experience, are still rare in the marketplace.
I agree, and I think testament to you with your book, that you have done exactly that, in my opinion, in the context of thought leadership. Codifying a lot of practice, a lot of insight that is quite hard to do. And I think one of the great skills of people that do thought leadership well is not always just the sort of how do you disseminate, but it's actually how do you create that content in the first place. And part of that creation is a co-creation between you as a provider with the client, and the way you ask questions, the way you interview, the way you make that person or people feel at ease can have a tremendous capacity to unearth information in ways that can be extremely insightful. Conversely, closed types of questions, making people feel uncomfortable, telling people what to do, I'm this sort of powerful consultant, do this, do that. You will miss out on all kinds of tacit information that could be useful in a lot of unforeseen ways.
Yeah, it's a delicate dance between the expert and the person who's trying to help the expert codify his or her ideas. It's a very delicate dance, and it takes a skilled and experienced person to do that. By the way, it's a great opportunity for for skills in college. I believe if you can if you can pump out graduates who have those skills, a lot of professional services firms will line up looking for graduates with these skills. Okay, on the industry level, one of the tensions that I noted the most was, and I think this applies at the your organization level as well, is how do you balance sharing proprietary knowledge, and the risk of your competitors basically saying, well, we do that too. We've changed the label of that. We've changed a bunch of words, but it's the same wine in a different bottle. I've seen it play out at the organizational level more than the industry level, where, your competitor is 30 years ago. Well, competitors are saying they do business re-engineering too. And even though the firm I worked at, we were the pioneers, dozens of consulting firms way before the web was really ubiquitous. We're saying they do business re-engineering too. And that's played out many times with many other big concepts, whether from consulting firms, law firms, right? You do thought leadership and you market it well, and your competitors can easily, appear to mimic. So what about that tension, and how big a tension did you find that at the industry level, and did you find it at the organizational level as well?
Yeah, definitely at both levels. And I think an important reminder sometimes is that you can be within an industry and in fierce competition as an organization with a competitor, but you all have a vested interest to safeguard the reputation of the industry. And, you and I could list a whole bunch of industries that have had tarnished reputations, some because of the types of activity they do, and I'm not going to mention those here. But let's just say that you've got an industry like consulting, which has got a fairly good reputation. Sometimes it divides people, but it's got fairly good. What you don't want is you and your competitors sort of fighting it out, and that can actually undermine the reputation of the whole industry, and then that undermines everyone. So there's definitely that kind of industry level sort of, how do you find that balance between, right, we're competing with one another, but we also have a duty to protect the reputation of the whole sector. But of course, absolutely, that there is a sort of a proprietary aspect to this, and particularly when you're trying to enter into new markets, as well as you're fighting in established market. If you suddenly see a new opportunity emerging, let's say analytics or climate change or reporting on climate change, or strategy at a leadership level, you've got to be able to position yourself in a distinct way. But you've also got to recognize that there's going to be quite a bit of overlap between what you do and what others, your competitors, are doing. And I think in most cases that's fair game, but you've got to reveal something in the thought leadership space, because if you're obsessed by protecting your proprietary, then you've got nothing to say in the public domain, and you purely rely on sort of informal networks. But equally, so that's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum, of course, is you just put everything out there, and then, of course, you run the risk that people take everything and repackage it for their own purposes, and that would undermine your business model as well. So it's that sort of middle ground, I think, Bob, where you've got to sort of provide some meaningful insight, and I would emphasize the word meaningful, because if it's superficial, you might as well not bother. It needs to be meaningful, but equally not too much that, it then gives the opportunity for others to take.
Did any of the 12 professional services firms, and you spoke with some pretty big ones, I think one was a consulting firm with 500,000 plus people, employees. Did any of them say anything along the following lines? Yes, our competitor, yes, we know when we produce really good stuff, our competitors can quickly say, well, we do this too, and they can publish their own white papers and all that stuff. Did any of those 12 say anything along the lines of the real advantage is not just marketing, it's actually scaling up our expertise to deliver it better than our competition? If we should expect them to copy us if our stuff really resonates in the marketplace, but our ultimate advantage is we can do this work better than others because we have superior internal training and development, superior methodology development. They can say they do it, but our competitors can say they do it, but they will not unless they invest, in the what I call the supply side of thought leadership. They're still not going to be able to do it as well as us. So that would be their ultimate competitive advantage, is to deliver the expertise better. Did any of the 12 companies you talked to talk about that?
Yeah, definitely, absolutely, and they not only talked about it, but we could also corroborate those statements by then looking at kind of the content and the delivery by speaking to clients, and also public information. I mean, one of the ultimate reasons why a lot of people were interested in thought leadership as well is it's an opportunity for you to corroborate your claims that you're making to clients. Let's say you're competing with a set of firms during the beauty contest, and one way of saying, not just saying, look, we're serious about strategy or strategic thinking, is to sort of back it up with sort of other types of content that you're doing. Now, if you're being cited in the New York Times or the Financial Times, or you're being quoted here, there, and everywhere on a specific topic, then it's reputation borrowing. It's reinforcing that verbal claim or the written claim in your documentation. So absolutely, yes, people, to some extent were concerned, but they did feel that if they genuinely had tangible evidence behind it, then that spoke for itself. But equally, I had lots of cynical conversations with people where they said, yeah, this firm claims they do that, but actually, when you scratch beneath the surface, there's no thought leadership that kind of backs that up. They're only doing it because they're trying to pivot into this new market, which they see as exciting, but they're yet to actually evidence that. And clients, going back to that point about clients being discerning, they pick up on that pretty quickly, because word gets around who genuinely has the expertise in certain areas.
Right. And so the competitor number one, they may have one or two people who can do this half decently, but our firm, we have dozens, we have hundreds, and they've done this for 10 years. And so anybody can say they can do this, but when you kind of scratch the surface, not everybody can do it as well as we can. That's the ultimate advantage, is can you deliver your expertise at a superior level of quality and quantity?
Indeed. And often, remember, clients nowadays can be quite demanding in terms of who is on the composition of the team that is providing the service, because they know, for instance, that often the partner or the senior partner gets rolled out for the presentations and everything, but they'll also say, what's your involvement in the project? We want to, and yes, we'll go with you, but this is the team we want, because we know who the experts are. And if you're just going to put a load of junior colleagues who don't have that expertise, then forget it. We'll go with competitor B.
So did you hear that from some of the 12 people in these big professional services firms, that some of their clients in effect have become much more sophisticated buyers
definitely.
their services and sophisticated users, so to say, of thought leadership. They're not
Definitely.
just lulled by the Harvard Business Review
Exactly. Yep.
article or the whatever the equivalent is in the legal profession.
That absolutely came through. And, of course, if you've got, a very strong, reputable brand, let's say, you are a McKinsey in consulting, or you're a JP Morgan in investment banking, then inevitably, that gets you to stage one because the reputation gets you to the shortlist. But clients, know that you may have this fantastic reputation as a firm, but if they've got a particular problem that they need, that they often want that solving, unless it is a highly politicized kind of project where the CEO of the client may want to revert to being able to say, we used this reputable firm as a way of sort of protecting themselves from a decision. But other than those very politicized kinds of projects, most cases, they're looking for, the most tailored team to their specific need. And so that's why you're absolutely right that they're advanced buyers. They understand the market quite well.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about what's happened since the publication of the paper 2 years ago. I would love to know what kind of conversations you've been in the world of academia, especially. Have you gotten reactions from, without naming other professors, saying still level, why are you researching that topic? Or have there been more? Oh wow, we totally missed this topic. Great to have some new research. More needs to be done. What kind of conversations have you found yourself in the world of colleges and universities?
I would say it's been received pretty well. So, what's interesting, in business schools, we have a few major accreditation bodies. One that's very big in the United States, AACSB, and one that's very big in Europe called Equus. And in both cases, we were invited to write articles for those major accreditation bodies around thought leadership, specifically in universities and business schools. We also got invited by the Times Higher Education, which in the United Kingdom is the major newspaper for higher education kinds of content. So I think that is quite a good sign that institutionally, let's say, both from accrediting bodies to journalism, but also from the universities themselves, this is something that we need to grapple with, and that was sort of alongside other sorts of interest, particularly I would say from PR marketing agencies are quite interested in this space. So, and I think as I alluded to before, the paper's been cited quite a few times and downloaded quite a lot. So I think we're getting some traction. But as you know, the wheels in academia can sometimes roll a bit slower than in business. So I think it's just a start.
So how will you know when the study of thought leadership in universities has finally arrived, or the field has finally arrived? What would be the signs in your mind that this is a well recognized field of exploration and teaching, of course?
I think it would require sort of a triad of research, teaching, and engagement and impact. So research would be that there starts to get some significant traction around publications in this sort of thought leadership space. The teaching would be right from everything from undergraduates who are straight out of high school, right the way up to senior executives, who are at C-suite level or just short of C-suite level, being taught, the latest insights around thought leadership from an evidence-based perspective. And then the third aspect is sort of the engagement and the impact, which is sort of what you and I are doing now, which is sort of, it's not just research, it's not just the teaching in the classroom, but it's also that these conversations are happening that sort of cut across, universities and colleges into sort of the business domain as well. So, if people like me are started to be invited to to give talks in businesses, to attend, industry conferences, to write reports or co-write these reports, then I think that suggests that there's sort of an appetite. But I think all three of those things, Bob, need to happen in tandem. But I think we're at least within universities, we're at a very nascent stage, despite a lot of interest at this stage.
So what do you think would accelerate that? Is it a big article in Harvard Business Review or MIT Sloan Management Review or another, highly prestigious academic journal that's written for both the academics and the practitioners? What would you think ignite this as a field of study that many universities finally take up?
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. That would be, an ideal outcome. Like, yeah, as you say, if you could publish an article and possibly even publish it, co-authored between, a professor and, let's say, head of talent management for, a real leading prominent organization on thought leadership, I think that could really gain a lot of traction at the sort of the right level, both university level as well as sort of at the business level. I think that would be, a really important step forward. I think related to that, gaining more research in this field, I think would be important, and also positioning thought leadership in relation to other fields within business, but also more broadly the social sciences, to sort of make a case for, well, why should we actually pursue thought leadership more? What's this adding that, the field of, I don't know, knowledge management, communication studies, journalism, all these other sort of allied fields that, are not the same, but they're linked. What would be the added value? And I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel, but what I do think is essential is that we equip the next generation of students, professionals, to understand what's going on, because it sort of brings us full circle to the start of our conversation. We've got a real challenge on our hands, in my opinion, at a societal level, and that's across and beyond both countries that you and I live in and work in, to across the globe. And so thought leadership, or what I call a high quality thought leadership, I think is going to play a really important role alongside other things, working with, technology, working with organizations, working with regulators to sort of redress, I think, this issue that we've got around, let's just call it fake news for simplicity.
Yeah, I think similarly that thought leadership needs to be seen as a noble profession of revealing the truth about problems in the world, whether they're problems for businesses or societal problems, homelessness, pervasive homelessness in the world, climate change, etc. The fake news problem. But, I look at thought leadership as a noble profession, and, hope it doesn't become seen as, well, it's just, it's just another word for propaganda. Or so, I'm that's why I would love to see more universities take this up as a field to be researched, and if worthy of further investigation, of turning into curriculum and turning into careers, so that graduates can see job opportunities and be better prepared for them, whether they go to work at a professional services firm of any type, or a software company, or any organization that believes they have an opportunity to gain mind share, and market share, if they can shed light on a very complex issue that their products and or services help address. So on that last thing, what do you the profession of thought leadership? I don't know if you've thought this far ahead, but do you think it's limited, more or less limited to, for students, for professional services firms, jobs there, or do you think it extends beyond the world of professional services?
I think it cuts across every facet of society. And I've been reflecting on this, and it's a slightly provocative thought, but if you think about two extreme scenarios in the world, one extreme is that you live in a country which you and I don't live in, but let's assume that you live in a country where information is suppressed and it's controlled, and only certain types of information get disseminated. You and I know that that's a very dangerous type of environment, and that's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum, though, we need to recognize is also potentially dangerous, which is unfettered information, not edited, completely sort of saturating people's minds. There's so many different sources of information. People can edit information, they can subvert it, they can create fake imagery, fake videos. And so I think this is a huge challenge in terms of what we're talking about, Bob, in terms of thought leadership, because in my opinion, we need to get to a situation where thought leadership is, and this is sort of goes to the sort of thrust of the paper that and our definition, which we define as knowledge from a trusted, eminent, and authoritative source that is actionable and provides valuable solutions to stakeholders.
Yeah, I really like that definition, by the way.
Good. I mean, and we try to sort of bring that from all that literature, and predominantly from the practitioner, but also the academic field. And I think, if we can apply thought leadership in that way, which is, evidence-based, it's coming from trusted sources, but it's not just about the input. It's also about the process of how it's created, and it's about how we disseminate it to others. If we can get those three stages done well, then I think we can start to really attack some of the big issues where people often maliciously, but often sometimes inadvertently as well, share information which can have very damaging implications for people, society, and the planet that we live on as well.
Absolutely. And the damaging, impacts surely precede the era of social media, the rise of the 21st century. But in my view, it's just been accelerated by social media. Just talk about word of mouth, going viral in seconds as opposed to months or years. It's just so much easier to corrupt the minds of anyone about nearly anything today than it was 35 years ago when I got into this field. So
I agree. And I think there is, going back to your question around where next, I think there is something that we need to do to engage with students around this, not just around the risks and the opportunities of thought leadership, because it is both, but also around getting insight from them. This goes back to this sort of co-creation. How can we effectively engage with the next generations, through technologies, through how they behave and interact? Because if we just think that it's a one-way street where, if we just follow this kind of linear model, people will follow and, they will conform, then I think we're misguided. We need to understand how people engage with knowledge, how people gain insight. And I think a trick, would be to try and involve students in that process as early as possible, because they will be an important part of the solution.
Yeah. Well, Will, this has been great. I really have enjoyed our conversation, and I hope you will continue your research of the field of thought leadership. It's so desperately needed in the marketplace that, and I know a lot of our clients would love to see more people graduate from universities who are, ready for the jobs that are already there, for jobs for which these people have to be developed or hired from: journalism, 10 years of journalism, or market research, or PR. They would love to see some ready-made graduates step into some pretty exciting roles. So
Bob, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Really enjoyed our conversation and looking forward to working with you and others in this very important domain.
absolutely. It's heartening to see the practice of thought leadership being explored by universities as a field worthy of exploration, something I hadn't seen in my 35 years of being in the thought leadership profession. And I sincerely hope that Will and other professors will conduct additional research on thought leadership over this decade to improve our collective knowledge on the topic and, of course, and ultimately, its practice. Will Harvey and I share a common goal, and that's of introducing college students to the field of thought leadership and preparing them for what we both believe will be an increasing number of jobs, well-paying jobs, at both for-profit and nonprofit organizations around the world. Now, in our next episode of Everything Thought Leadership, my colleague Alan Alpert will be interviewing Paul Roehrig. Paul is a thought leadership research professional who launched a think tank at IT services powerhouse Cognizant Technology Solutions 10 years ago. It's a think tank that studies the future of work. Paul left Cognizant in 2021 after nearly 12 years at the firm. Today, he is Chief Strategy and Marketing Officer at a software engineering firm called Ascendion. You can look for Alan's interview with Paul Roehrig in November.